You're listening to the Straight Fire Podcast, hosted by me, Benjamin Anderson, my brother, Noah Anderson, and our good friend, Landon Averett. We hope you take this opportunity to support the podcast in whatever way possible, and we hope you enjoy this episode of the Straight Fire Podcast. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome into another Straight Fire Podcast episode. We are delighted to have you, and we hope that your day is going well whenever that day is taking place, because we try not to reveal when we record.
Why do we do that?
We don't want to ruin the podcast magic, because this needs to apply to anyone at any time listening to it. It's just one of those podcast things.
Yeah, that sounds good. Sorry, I was just curious.
That's why we don't want to ruin the magic. We try to keep the you can't tell by the lighting or anything what time it is. I mean, we are recording at 2 a.m. right now, so just hate to burst your little bubble. Yeah, 3:30 a.m. Hate to burst your little bubble, but no, we have been a little delayed in uploading episodes since the first one because we've had some studio malfunctions.
We'll go with that.
Yeah, we'll go with that. We've had some studio malfunctions and just it's just one of those things. But thank you guys for tuning into this episode. This episode is going to be about controlling our thoughts. Can we do that? How do we do that? What are some methods, some things we can take away from this podcast, some realities that we can take away and better help us throughout our days and our weeks, control our thoughts and set our mind on godly things. So unless y'all have anything to add, we can get straight into the first question.
Nope, I think we're good.
Question number 1, are we responsible for controlling every thought that comes through our heads?
That's a very interesting question. I believe this question came from 2 Corinthians 10 verse 5.
Actually, it came from me.
Actually, it came from me.
What do you mean? What do you mean?
I sent this to you. This was one of the ones I sent
Yeah,
to
but
you.
I turned it into this podcast.
Anyways, when I originally...
Basically, nobody knows where it came from.
As with most of our podcasts. No, anyways, when I was coming up with this question, and I'm sure when Benjamin was thinking about this question, one of the verses that came to the forefront of my mind was 2 Corinthians 10 verse 5, which says, casting down arguments and every high thing that exalts itself against the knowledge of God, bringing every thought into captivity to the obedience of Christ. So I think there's two things that we need to look at. We need to look at, obviously the question, what are we responsible for? And then if we're not responsible for anything, where is the line drawn, basically, is what I'm trying to look at. First, I do not believe we will be held responsible for every thought that enters our head, right? Everyone is tempted, right? Jesus was tempted. James 1:14 says, each man is tempted when he is drawn away by his own desires and enticed, right? To desire something, to be enticed by something, the thought has to enter your head, right? That's just simply how we as humans work. Something enters our head and we evaluate whether it's something we want to pursue or something we don't want to pursue, if we wanted to delay that, anything like that. But it is a thought that enters our head, correct? So it cannot be a sin to have that thought enter your head. Now, I would say, and I think what we're going to prove in this podcast through the Bible, is it is not a sin for it to enter your head, but it is a sin for you to entertain that thought, right? For you to keep dwelling on it. And as we'll talk about, it makes it so much harder to resist that temptation when you simply dwell on it, right? And it can be a sin to even entertain it.
Right. Yeah, Landon, would you add to that?
Yeah, I was sitting here. I got locked out of my iPad, so
that's a shame.
That's fine. It's fine. I'll figure it out. But ChatGPT, where are you? No, it's okay. I think one of the most important things to realize, and Noah set this up, is that there's a difference between temptation and sin. Okay, and that's a clear line you have to clarify on, because if you go into that it's the same thing, then you create very big problems with the view of Scripture, because in Hebrews it says that we do not have a high priest, paraphrasing of course, but we do not have a high priest that cannot, when you look at the wording, relate to and understand the temptations that we go through. What it was showing is that Jesus understood what that was like, and I don't want to get into that a lot because that's something I know we'll talk about later, but there's a difference between temptation and sin. And so when you talk about the question being, are you responsible for every thought that you have, it's kind of, we do this a lot in the podcast where we have a question, or you do this a lot. You have a question, and me and Noah joke that the answer is yes and no. And this is, yet again, one of those questions that you presented to us that is the same thing, where it's just like, yeah, and no, depending on what you mean by the question. some of the audience might be at this point just being like, that's just what they're answering everything with, just to make the answer easier to get to. But no, genuinely, the one side of that, of course, is no, you're not responsible for every thought that enters into your mind. And I won't go into that anymore because I know that is something we're going to discuss later. But you go through what is the difference between the temptation and the sin. That's where it's not your responsibility. But now you want to flip that and say, okay, well, yes. And what I mean by that is you are responsible for what you continually allow to come into your mind, because we're all going to have times where something, I know you've got something, but let me
Sorry,
finish this before
go
you
ahead.
interrupt.
Sorry, I can't control my face. I can't control my face.
He's just like, I have something.
I have
No,
a whole-
when Vision has an idea, his whole body says
I just don't have a good poker face. Anyway,
He does
which
not.
is good because I don't play poker. Check out the podcast on gambling, by the way.
And that's why. But no, the other part of that, and then I'll let Benjamin say what he was going to, is yeah, you do, because there are things that we do continually, and what we call habits. There are things that you do on a regular basis that affect what you think and what you do. And so it's in that sense, and I don't want to get very into it because I know the second question is going to be a lot more of the practical side of this, but on a very general sense, no, because there's temptation, and that's going to come whether you want it to or not. But yes, in the sense that you have a job to restrict what you allow continually into your mind.
Can I say one thing really quickly before you?
What I have to say is not long, so yes, go ahead.
I was just going to add, it really comes down to this idea of taking captive every thought, right? It doesn't say that you have to control. It doesn't say you have to control everything that enters into your head, but once it does enter your head, it is up to you to take that thought captive, right? To make sure everything you think and dwell upon serves the purpose of God, right? Everything that you will allow yourself to take part in mentally is something that brings God glory, or something that will not take you away from serving God, right? So this idea of taking captive, right? And the word literally means to lead away, right? So any bad thought, I'm going to lead away. If it's a good thought, then I'm going to hold on to it, right? And make sure I dwell on that thing as much as possible.
I was thinking, it just hit me like while Landon was talking. Oh, we're not responsible for the thoughts that enter our head. We're responsible for the thoughts that we keep in our head, right?
I was just saying that's what we've been saying. Yeah,
I know.
Good job.
Exactly. That's why I was trying to say it before you all said it. No,
We
but
got him there. No,
It's
we
just
didn't.
it's just this idea of, we go throughout our day and like you'll think of something like, oh my goodness, that was something horrible. Like why would that ever come into my head? Like and you don't want it there, but the thought occurs. Like, should that have come in at all? But it's just, sometimes that's just human nature. Landon cannot be tempted to sin if Landon can never think of a sin to be tempted with, right? You cannot be tempted to sin if you can't think up of a sin to be tempted with, or even if you can't, even if your mind is incapable of seeing things in the world to tempt you, right? Just this idea of, are you responsible for the things that you see and how that can impact you to think? No, but you're responsible for the things that you see and that you keep in your head, right? For instance, I'm responsible for, for instance, I think reading is a great example, because what you read pretty much goes directly into your head, right? You can drive past signs and you can scroll on YouTube or whatever, and you can kind of ignore some of that, there's a great podcast on social media, which you guys should go check out. But this idea of like, if you are reading just trash every single day, well, that's what's going to be in your head, and that's what you're choosing to dwell on, right? But if you're reading God's word every single day, and that's why I chose reading, so I could include God's word. If you're choosing God's word, you're choosing to dwell on good things, and that's a simple example. But what we are choosing to put in our minds, is about what we're trying to keep in our minds, right? Not just what comes and goes, if that makes sense. Oh, snap. There goes my iPad. All right.
I think one of the best verses that illustrates everything that we've said is James 1. And when James is describing what temptation actually is, he says in verse 14, but each one is tempted when he is drawn away by his own desires and enticed. And so basically what he's saying is there's something that you want, because your flesh is weak in the sense that sometimes there are going to be things you're going to see and you're going to want it. And he says the temptation is you see that and you want it. That's internally. It's there. It's the thought. It's not always going to be a thought, but the idea here is the thought is there. Then when the desire has conceived, it gives birth to sin, and sin, when it's full grown, brings forth death. Now I want you to notice when desire has conceived, and then when it gives birth to sin, basically what he's saying is when you give this desire, when you give this thought the time to grow in your mind, because of this idea of conception, when it's conceived, When you think of a child and it's conceived and he's in there and he's growing in the womb, that's the idea that he's trying to get across here with sin. He's saying, or this thought, he said, this thought came in. You didn't mean for the thought to be there, but now it's here. Now, what do you do? The question isn't about whether or not you'll be tempted. The question is what you will do when you are. And so really it's not about the thought. It's about whether or not you embrace it.
Yeah.
And that's what James was trying to get across is the temptation is the problem, but the temptation isn't the sin. The sin will be if you embrace what is there.
Yeah, absolutely.
I guess the thought here behind this question, now that I was kind of formulating it, is, can you draw a line from where a thought crosses to something you don't want to have to, now that thought has become a sin, right? And I don't think you can. I can't get in Landon's head. I can't get in Landon's head and be like, once Landon thinks about this for 6 seconds, for 6 minutes, 37 seconds, that's when it's a sin. I just don't think you can do that. What I do think is, though, sin is very good about you understand once you've sinned, right? It's pretty straightforward. If your conscience is in good working order, you've understood, you've understood, I think that's the way to say that, right?
You understand?
Yeah, you understand. Man, it just left me for a second. You understand when you have fallen short of the will of God, and so it can be scary with these random thoughts that come in every now and then. It happens to everyone, but I think the key is I think you can reassure yourself by what you're choosing to act on, and what you're choosing to put in your mind.
Every evil thought that comes into your head will not manifest itself in a sin, but every sin that you commit started out as an evil thought. A lot of times we like to start out and be like, well, this is just a thought, it's fine. But when in reality, you need to flip that and realize that every time that I've messed up, it started with me thinking like this. And so I think we need to start shifting how we think from, oh no, this is just a thought I don't need to have, to what could this become if I don't change the way I'm thinking.
Yeah, I think that's a good. I think
that was definitely the better way to say it than when I said.
No, yours is good.
I think that's a good rule just in general for sin. Any time you're tempted, Satan is trying to get you to think about it, what it does for you right then. He's trying to get you to ignore what it's going to do for you in the future when it's eventually found out, when there's consequences of it, right? So think about the consequences, right? Not just the right now, right then, what you're going to feel like as you partake, but think about what it's going to be like if so-and-so found out about it, or if 30 years down the road, something came up about, like, they found out that you actually had stolen something, or what ultimately God is trying to get us to think about how in eternity, if you have continued to let this sin grow in your life, then ultimately Jesus is going to say to you, depart from me, for I never knew you, right? So really, that is what we need to be doing when that moment of weakness enters in. We have to bring our minds and take them all the way to eternity, standing before God's throne when our actions are being judged, right? To remember, hey, what I'm doing right here, even though it seems like it's not going to hurt anyone, even though it seems like it's just a thought, right? And it's not a big deal, ultimately that is going to be judged before the creator of the universe and decide where I spend the rest of eternity, right? Millions upon billions upon trillions of years, right? So we cannot diminish something in our own mind just to make ourselves feel better.
I'm talking to the youth guys class, and I think I've mentioned this every podcast since I started teaching it. But I'm talking to the youth guys class, and today we talked about self-control. And the Greek term for self-control literally translates to sound in mind, right? And we talked about self-control, and we talked about discipline, because you can't have one without the other. But it was this idea of, to have self-control and to be disciplined, you have to keep your mind, you have to keep your goal on where you're trying to get to in the end, right? Because Paul talks about it where this came from was 1 Corinthians 9, 24 through 27. Right, he's talking about being an athlete, and what he says is, I discipline, starting in 27, but I discipline my body and keep it under control, lest after preaching to others, I myself should be disqualified. And Paul just talked to them about running races and fighting fights, and he's bringing up this idea to the Corinthians, and they would understand this because they saw like these Greek games where there were lots of races and there were quasi boxing events. They weren't really they weren't really boxing. It was like before boxing, like fighting before boxing. If that makes
Wrestling.
Oh, so like MMA?
kind of. No,
It's just get the other person on the ground?
no, it was like boxing. I think with a whole lot less rules, like a lot more wins.
So it's MMA.
Yeah.
No,
Get the other person on the ground.
Anyway, that's not the point. Paul's mentioning these athletes, right? These professional athletes, and their entire goal. I'm not going to bring up the boxing thing again. I'm just going to talk about
Get the other person on the ground. That's what it is.
I'm going to talk about running a race.
them
The entire goal is to run their race, right? And so anything that they do, whether it be what they eat, how they train, what they are going to, what their routine is going to be that day, is all about winning that race. And Paul's trying to instill the same thing. Paul's trying to instill the same thing in us. Everything that you do is going to be about serving God, right? And I think it's the same thing when we're talking about controlling our thoughts, right, and having self-control. It's going to start in the mind, right? Everything that you choose to think about is going to impact your decisions throughout the day. And so when we talk about, not dwelling on the bad things, right? And choosing not to think about, or choosing not to dwell on these thoughts that come in our head, and keeping heaven in mind. Remember that when we are tempted by sin, and when these thoughts come and they keep coming, that we are supposed to look to heaven, right? Everything that you do is about getting to heaven. And so with that in mind, having this self-control to understand of where you are trying to go, right? With every kind of temptation.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, sorry. I'm so used to tuning in when other people finish their points. It's odd. Anyway, do we want to look at the next question, unless y'all have anything more to say?
Nope, I don't think so.
All right. So question number 2. All right. So if we are responsible for every thought in our heads, how are we responsible? And then if we aren't, what are we responsible for? So there's 2 aspects to this question here, right? How are we responsible for the thoughts that we have in our heads? And then if we aren't, what do we need to be responsible for? We've already kind of...
You can take care of the no, you're not responsible, and I'll take care of the yes, we are responsible.
Okay, yeah. So
we've already talked about this a little bit. So
yeah, and I'm just gonna hit it again. I think we've got a pretty good idea of it, right? You're not responsible for controlling every thought that enters your head, right? But you are responsible for making sure you don't dwell on it, right? And it can become dangerous if you continue to dwell on it. And I know Landon is going to talk about when it does become dangerous. I'm going to go ahead and let him handle it because I think we've got a good grasp on the
we've talked about the first one. Yeah, for sure.
We definitely covered that pretty well. But no, kind of going back to, I liked Benjamin's illustration of reading because this is true. I'm not a big reader.
Me either.
I'll be the first to admit that. I don't really like
No,
reading.
how are you in reading? We're all confessing up to not being big readers. Are you?
I'm frustrated with myself because I used to be a big reader.
You used to be a huge reader. I think I read
really
myself
love
out.
reading, but I just don't go to it as much as I should. Like I need to be more willing to pick up a book. And I love reading when I do it. I don't ever seek it out,
I'm not there. I'm kind of like, it's a book.
Reading.
It's kind of like me eating lettuce, But no, anyway. But when you think about these things, that how quickly they get into your mind, we're so quick to go, it's not my job to take care of this, not my responsibility. But then how much change of mindset it is to say, okay, well, maybe it is part of my responsibility. And it's true that you're going to go about your life, and whether that be through school or work or just around family and friends, and there are going to be things said that shouldn't be. And so what you're going to present thoughts which should not be in your mind, those are things that you can't control. But there are some things which you can. And so whether it be, we talked about this in the social media one, there's going to be times when you're going to be on social media and you're going to see things, especially with like YouTube, TikTok, or things of that nature, where it's just that short form content that you're constantly going through. You're going to see quite a bit of stuff that you shouldn't. And you're constantly going to be viewing that. For some people, it's going to be what you listen to. The songs that you're listening to are continually saying things that should not be said and should not be listened to by someone who claims to be a child of God. And so when you are constantly hearing these things, what are they doing? They're sitting in your mind. And you're planting seeds which will eventually grow unless you get rid of them. And I guarantee you, if you're constantly listening to music that has things that it shouldn't have in it, or watching movies that hasn't, maybe even reading books or hanging around people, you are not trying to get rid of those seeds that have been planted. They're just there. Probably one of the best examples of this is foul language. And this one is just very practical, and it's very easy to imagine. And it's around the world. You hear it. I mean, if you're at work or you're at school or you go to Walmart, you're going to hear it. And I'm not talking about any of those times because those are things that you have to do. But how quickly How quickly do you hear? You jump on YouTube and 3 shorts in, you hear something. Or you jump on Spotify and you're listening and you hear something. And the more you listen to it, the more that it's there. And if it's there, then when I get frustrated or I stub my toe on the table or I get into a fight, and stubbing your toe on the table,
So painful.
man, that hurts.
Oh.
But all of these times, what's going to be there? Well, those words. Well, how did they get there? More often than not, you cannot say it's all from work. What you put into your mind shapes who you are. And that's what we were trying to explain, is that you cannot control what enters your mind, but you control what stays.
Yeah.
And so you're not responsible for everything that enters. To an extent you are, because you can I've lost my wording, but you can affect the environment.
You can
with what
greatly
you're in.
control what you allow into your mind.
Into your mind. But how greatly do you have to control that? This is very hard. And so what you allow into your mind and what you allow to stay there will shape who you are as a person. And so that is what you're responsible for.
You know, I was thinking, I think one of the hardest times I had with, it's funny, foul language was when I think I talked about this on the social media podcast. It was when I was in this mindset of, well, I hear language at work all the time, and language is just one of those, foul language. Foul language is just one of those things that you just have to go through life hearing. And so I took that and I gave myself the liberty to just not care about what language was being, said in like short form content. I didn't go, well, I'm going to watch, whatever this show is, because it's full of foul language, but it's just life nowadays. I didn't do that, but I was just more willing to put up with language than I had been before. And that's what I felt like I struggled with the most. And that's probably the reason I try to stay off that stuff now. To an extent, I try to stay off that stuff now. It's because it wasn't when I was just hearing those words at work or at home. It's because I was choosing, right, to listen to those. And I gotta be honest, I don't remember all the details. I sometimes worry about my memory, and like some people remember such specifics. I do not, but I'm sure that no, you're not a big specifics guy.
I don't remember anything.
Yeah.
So,
but I'm sure that I struggled with that because it's just stayed in my head, right? And so because I was choosing to, it wasn't that I was listening to it, and it's the same thing with what we think. I'm choosing to do this, and it's going to impact me so much more.
yeah. I agree with both of y'all, and I know we beat this point to death. But I'll add a quick personal example. Again, I used to work a construction job, and it was really rough. And I probably worked with really rough people. All I heard was language, but I didn't start struggling with language until I did something like Benjamin said, where hey, it's not a big deal. I'm going to allow myself to hear that. That's when I started struggling. Is when I decided I'm going to make an active choice to allow this to come into my life. But, Jesus talks about this a lot, and he really challenged the Jews when it came to this, right? On the Sermon on the Mount, one of the greatest sermons ever preached, Jesus is trying to challenge the Jews, hey, it's not just about what you do, but what you think has equal importance, right? He talks about in Matthew 5:22, talking about, you have heard it said, if you murder your brother, talking about murdering your brother. But I say to you, he who is angry with his brother without a cause shall be in danger of judgment. And whoever says to his brother, Raka, shall be in danger of the council. But whoever says, you fool, shall be in danger of hellfire. Right? So it's not just about what you do, but saying or thinking something about them can be just as negative as if you had really done it in real life, right? He continues on to the second example, which is Matthew 5:28. But I say to you, whoever looks at a woman to lust after her already has committed adultery with her in his heart, right? So there is a line where if I entertain a thought long enough, it does become a sin, right? When I see something that I want, right? Like I see, if someone lusts after a woman, well, he's committed adultery with her in his heart. He is fully ready and willing to commit adultery, right? When that temptation is presented, something like that, right? Jesus is trying to emphasize to these people that what you think is just as important, right? Because it's what we talked about. It's those seeds, right? Matthew 6:21 says, Jesus continuing on, says, for where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. Right? So where your heart is where your value systems are going to be. So what you let into your heart is important. Proverbs 4:23 says, keep your heart with all diligence, for out of it spring the issue of life, right? And Landon's made the point before, but it's not talking about my heart that beats. It's talking about my mind, right? Who I am. It's talking about my core, right? So what I let in there is going to be what comes out of me. It's going to be where my treasure is. It's going to be what I think about and dwell upon, right? And if I think about and dwell on the wrong things, whenever a weak moment comes, like Landon talking about stubbing your toe, or when you're tired and you don't feel like doing the right thing, what's there first? Well, it's not something scriptural to get you through it. It's something that you've allowed into your heart that says, hey, do the wrong thing, right? So, and we'll probably talk about this here in a minute, but there are ways to not purge yourself, but again, control your environment in a way to where you can, whenever you're weak, dwell on something that will get you through it instead of something that will tempt you and cause you to stumble.
Right. Landon, would you add anything before we go on to the third
I was
question?
just going to add a verse, or Romans 8, Paul would talk about that those who live according to the flesh, they'll set their minds on things of the flesh. And I'll drop down in a couple of verses and say those that live according to the Spirit set their minds on things of the Spirit. How important was it for him to add that clause? He could have just said those that live according to the flesh are going to live according to the flesh, but he added that set their mind on that, showing that the importance began where your thoughts were.
Yeah.
Where your thoughts are, the rest of you will follow suit.
You know, if one of you wanted to, while we start the third question, like look up that Greek word of what it means to set your minds upon. No, I don't know if you want to. Are you going
That's how
to?
you
What
know.
verse is it in?
What?
What verse is it
That
in?
was Romans 8:5.
Okay, I got it.
Okay.
Romans 8:5.
I'm going to go and read the third question. I guess Landon, me and you can,
Yeah.
you can get into it.
Yeah,
Yeah, Landon. It's
He's just trying to get rid of me.
it's just
That's
me.
what he's doing.
Yeah, for real. It's just Landon. It's just me and you now.
Yay.
All right. So Landon, what are some ways?
It's Colossians 3:2.
It's a different one. Go to Romans 8.
Okay, sorry.
Romans
The
8:5.
Colossians
Wow.
3:2 is set
Hold
your
on.
affections
Or
on
maybe
things
it
above.
is. Maybe I'm just crazy. I might be crazy, guys.
What is
let me
it?
see.
Romans?
Romans 8:5.
I think they're both. No, it's Romans 8:6. Yeah, Colossians 3:2 and Romans 8:6 are very similar.
Okay.
For to be carnally minded is death, but to be spiritually minded is life and peace.
Okay. I was about to say, bro, I'm going crazy.
I just looked up. Set your mind upon it, and Colossians 3:2 was
Okay,
the first thing that came up.
So Landon,
What am I looking at? Spiritually minded.
the Greek word. No. To set your mind upon. What that word means.
That's in Colossians 3:2, not Romans 8:6.
For to set your mind on the flesh is death. That's Romans 8:6.
What I'm looking at. Mine is King James. It says, "For to be carnally minded is death, but to be spiritually minded
Okay,
is life."
Mr. King James.
I'm gonna go to
Carnally
I'm gonna go to the Colossians 3:2,
To be
and I'll give, you,
carnally minded is death.
I'll give you the same thing.
Okay.
Okay, you can go.
Landon,
I'm sorry.
What are we
sorry.
What are we doing? Sorry.
we're recording a podcast. What are some ways we put it into practice, disciplining our minds, right, and controlling our environment? What are some ways that we can do that moving forward?
Well, like every good preacher, I have 3 points. No.
The right and biblical way to
The
do
right
things.
biblical way. No, honestly, I don't even know if it was 3. I just felt like saying that, so I'll fill in 3. Here we go. No, I mean, there's a lot of things that you could fill in here.
Yeah.
These things, but I mean, I guess I will do 3, and just to be kind of quick with it. But the first one is that you have to be aware and intentional. In Psalm 139, the writer would say, "Search me, O God," and he'll go through kind of telling or wording this psalm in a way that he wants God to show him and to tell him the things that he needs to work on. Now, what the psalmist is not actually expecting is God to look through his life and then send him a paper saying, here's the 6 things you need to work on. What he was asking is that God help him see the things in his own life. He said, God, you search me and you show me. In other words, God, I need you to help me see the things that I don't have right. So the first thing you have to be aware, right? If you want to change something about yourself, you have to know that it needs to be changed, which is common sense. But
Yeah.
it still must be
But hey,
said.
a lot of people don't do that.
Right.
Yeah.
And you know, it's there, like it's common sense, but it must be said. You have to be aware of what it is that needs to be changed. And so when we think about thoughts, okay, I'm going to approach this from the area of you need to control it better. You know, we've spent quite a bit of the first part of this podcast talking about it's not your responsibility because temptation is going to happen whether or not you want it to. Okay, we're done with that. We've moved on to the section of we're going to talk about the things that you are in charge of, you are responsible for, what you allow in. You need to be aware of what you're allowing to come into your mind because what you're thinking right now, because every person has something that they realize that, hey, I'm allowing this to have too much of my mind. And so what is that? Maybe for you it is language, or maybe for you it is, as Jesus would talk about, the way you look at women. Whatever that may be, or maybe it's just gossip, or maybe it's just how you view other people, whatever that might be. Hey, I've started letting these thoughts take my life. Be aware of it. First off, you have to be aware, and you have to be very intentional about what's happening, because if you just go, okay, well, that's a problem, and leave it at that, then you're not going to get anywhere. So first off, you got to be intentional. Okay, and then the second one is also common sense. Start controlling what you can. right? For those, and I keep going back to language because this is the most practical one because this is everywhere. Okay, I realize that I have a problem with language. I can't control the fact that my coworkers say things that they shouldn't. I can ask them to not, but I can't stop them. Okay, but what can I stop? Well, I can stop watching things that have it in it. I can stop listening to things that have it in it. Maybe I have to stop being around certain people. What you can control, you must. And then the third one being this, that just because you've worked on getting something out doesn't mean you're good. You have to replace it with something else. I know I've done this before, but I don't remember where it's at, where the demon leaves the man. No, help me out. Where's this at? This is Luke. It's in the gospel somewhere. It's Luke. Okay, I helped him out.
Hold on.
Yeah, I would say, man, Noah's
the Bible guy. Look, my iPad's messed up, guys. I'm trying.
Luke 11, 24 through 26.
Okay, I don't even need you to read it, but you can go read that later if you want to. But what had happened is this man had a demon. The demon was gone, and when the demon came back, he's seen, as it was worded, that the house had been swept. Now, what do you do? Now, when you first look at that, you go, okay, well, the man is good, right? The man is okay because the demon's gone. Well, maybe you're looking in your life and you say, all right, look, I realized that I had a problem with X. And I realized that I worked on that I had this problem, and I started working on it, and I got rid of it. That doesn't mean you're out of what your problem is. The man that lost the demon thought he was good, and so he cleaned the house, but he didn't put anything else in. And so that's what you've got to realize is in your own life, whatever that is, if you can get aware of it, and if you can learn to control what that is, maybe you have to get help to control what that is. Just because that bad thing is gone doesn't mean you have the good thing. You must replace that as well. And so those are just three simple things. There's a lot more that you could go into, but those are three quick, simple ones.
I have that definition for you, Benjamin.
Yeah.
To set one's mind upon, or set your affection on, it's what's used in Colossians 3, the translation I have. It means to exercise the mind, that is, entertain or have sentiment or opinion. By implication, to be disposed, more or less earnestly in a certain direction, intensively to interest oneself in, with concern or obedience, to set the affection on, to be like one, to be of the same mind, savor, think, right? So just it's this idea of I am going to intentionally focus on, and then Colossians that's the starting word, and then he would say on things above, not on things of the earth, right? So it's not just something that happens by choice. It is something that I have to intentionally choose and strive for every day. If you just think that coming to church is enough, right, to have your mindset on things above, I'm sorry to say, but you're wrong, right? You have to be actively seeking that every day. They're not going to just... We talked about choices, right? And the choice you make, for instance, for language, the choice I allow that to come into my life. You have to make a choice to choose Jesus, choose his words, right? Choose God and his words in the Bible, choose the Bible as a whole. And I'm going to choose to meditate on that thing. It's not just going to happen naturally, at least not at first. So I'm going to make an effort, like Landon said, to be intentional about meditating on good things. Philippians 4:8 talks about meditating on good things, right? And I'm going to be intentional about doing that because I'm commanded to do so. It's not something that will happen. I am commanded to meditate on the Bible and on good things.
You know, with that being said, I don't really have much to add to that. I guess it's time to close the podcast. We want to thank you all for listening and tuning in. We hope that this helps you throughout your day-to-day walk, and we hope that you continue to look for new Straight Fire Podcast episodes. Go follow us on social media. I'm planning on being a little more active there to start the new year. I know that's something you've never heard before. But planning on being a little more active there to start the new year because we just did a podcast on it, and if people are going to be on it, they might as well be seeing Straight Fire Podcast stuff on it. But yeah, thank you all for your support. We'll see you guys in the next episode.